Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I gather you can hear me too.
Yes, I can hear
I'm
you.
never
great.
sure. Had a number of instances where, for some reason, Zoom wouldn't hear my microphone or wouldn't recognize it.
Well, this is only my second Zoom call, so I decided to call in early to make sure everything was working okay.
I always call in early too because I just never know. And when things don't work out well, I'm not too quick at figuring them out, so I give myself a little time.
Are you one of the task force members?
No, I'm a consultant for the city. My name's Joe Power. I'm with Rincon.
Okay. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi.
I'm Sheila
Good, and you?
Lightfoot. Sheila
And
Lightfoot.
what's your role?
I'm on the task force.
You are on the task force. Okay, nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, same here.
Looks like Sarah from Rincon is also on the line.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Nice to meet
I
you.
assume others will join shortly.
Well, as long as I'm logged on and everything is working, I'm a happy camper. So
Yeah, I'm good so far.
Sorry, that weird sound was me.
That was you, okay.
Yes. Teams has like the strangest sounds. I guess I should be grateful because I always know there's something going on when Teams makes the sound, but.
Okay, I wasn't sure that I could get rid of the sound from my phone, so I just unplugged it. So there you go.
Yeah.
I'm playing safe. Is the meeting scheduled for an hour or an hour and a half?
It's an hour and a half.
Okay. Oh, hi, Allison.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Sheila Lightfoot here.
Yep, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Guys, I'm going to leave and rejoin. It's not giving me my host privileges, so I'm going to rejoin in 1 second.
Okay, sounds good.
See, I had one a couple of weeks ago. I was in a hearing for the city of Camarillo, and I was supposed to do a presentation. I was on, everything was, as far as I knew, was fine. We sat through there for an hour. We're going through everything. Finally got to my piece, and I tried to talk, and nobody could hear me.
Oh, you're so close.
And we went around and about for 10 minutes. They were saying, Joe, we can see you're there. Why aren't you talking? Finally had to log off, call in, and we got it sorted out. But it was kind of embarrassing. So I definitely do everything to be absolutely sure it's working beforehand these days.
Yes.
Well, I tried to figure out, I'm always hearing people talk about muting, and okay, I'm doing this on my iPad, so I've got my computer screen over here to look at. And so I thought, well, I hope no one wants me to mute because there's no way for me to do it. Hi.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to give everyone a second to come into the room, and then we'll get started.
Hey, Barry.
Hey, Will, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Hey, Allison, this is Barry Talley, by the way.
Hi, Barry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for spending time on me today.
Yeah, no worries. And happy to, I got it today. It's been a busy day, but I'm also happy
I'm
if you
sure.
have more questions to go through. And that's, I'm here to help you with questions, especially from our task force members. We want to make sure that you've got all the information you need.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
All right, let's see. We're getting close to everybody. We'll give a few more minutes. Then we'll do a little roll call. Mike's here. Great. Marianne's here. Looks like we're waiting on Craig. We'll give him a minute more. And we've got Sheila's here. Barry's here.
She's here.
Great. Yep. Hi, Angie.
Hi. I was just able to watch this PowerPoint that you have on, that's on your website.
Okay, great. The one that we presented to the community
Yeah.
last week or 2 weeks ago now?
January
Great.
19th. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. We're going to give a second more. It looks like we still need Craig Barbarian, and we still need Dawn Williams. Great. I think we're getting close.
Hello.
Hi, Craig. How you doing?
Good. How you guys doing
Doing well. Thank you.
for Monday?
All right, we're gonna wait one more minute for Dawn, and then if not, we'll just go ahead and get started, and she can join us when she's available. We were commenting today in another meeting that the promptness of meetings to start on Zoom is certainly, I think, it tends to be a lot more prompt than when we all met in person.
For sure.
Very good.
Since we don't have to leave our homes.
Yeah. And I noticed Kaiser, where I have my health insurance, now everything's a Zoom call as well. And
Yeah.
I was 2 minutes late to my meeting today and it was canceled.
Oh my gosh.
Because I didn't sign up 10 minutes early.
Great. Okay, well, we'll go ahead, and if everybody could mute for a second. In general, it just helps with a call this big. If there's ambient background noise, it just helps prevent feedback. But certainly, this is a discussion, and so throughout the next 90 minutes we have together, please unmute yourself and do participate. Just if you can mute when you're not on, it's helpful for everything. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the recording of this. Great. And then actually, Sarah, can you hit record? I think I made you host. Are you able to hit record?
It says that it's recording. It says
Okay, great.
to pause
Okay.
or to stop recording. So
Okay, great. Well, then we're good. So I wanted to take a minute and introduce myself. I'm Allison Bartle. I work for the City of West Hollywood, and I'm in the Rent Stabilization and Housing Division. We're going to go ahead and go around the circle and have everybody, if you could just tell us your name, the organization that you represent, and then why you're passionate about housing in West Hollywood. So I'm gonna kick things off. Angie, you're the first one on my list, so if you could kick things off, and then we'll go around.
Sure. Angie Brooks. I'm principal of Brooks Plus Scarpa Architects. We've been around for about 25 years. We have an office in Los Angeles and an office in Florida. We're about 20 people. And I'm really passionate about housing because I think housing makes cities better. I like to say that I'm a frustrated planner because I co-founded a nonprofit called Livable Places that was in operation for 6 years that did development and worked on policy. My partner started the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute, and I used to work for the LA Community Design Center, which is a nonprofit that develops affordable housing.
Great, thank you. Next on my list, I have Don Williams. So sorry, Don, I don't know when you jumped in, but we are just going around and saying, name your organization and why you're passionate about housing in West Hollywood.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Williams, and I am new to City Task Force, but I'm very excited to join at this level. So my background is law and criminal justice, but I got into housing over the last 4 years. Really been paying attention to the crisis that we have. So I'm currently a land use planning consultant. I help developers build, whether that's single family, multifamily, or commercial, mixed use. I've definitely been more on the marketing side of it, but my passion is in the affordable housing usage. And so I'd like to see more of the creative city bills and state laws that we do have advantage of, to utilize those as much as possible.
Thank you. Sheila, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I've lived in West Hollywood for almost 30 years, and I'm a tenant. I'm a former planning commissioner. So I'm bringing a perspective that is totally local to this. I know a lot about our housing situation. I have seen what's happened over our last cycle. I know, one of the first things I did was go downtown to sit in on a SCAG meeting to try to understand RENA years and years ago. So I'm really bringing the perspective really completely focused on West Hollywood.
Thank you. Adam, could you go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Kroll. I'm a homeowner here in West Hollywood and an activist in the community. Like others have said, housing is a really important issue for us to address. So I'm really excited to be here and help contribute.
Thank you. Barry, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? I just unmuted. So I'm Barry Talley. Like before, I'm a long-term resident, 26 years in the Tri-West neighborhood. Seen a lot of changes. I guess the organization I represent is myself and my neighbors and my community. One of the things that I've been really interested in of late is kind of the erosion of community in West Hollywood. And I'm trying to ascertain the best way to identify what's helping to erode that sense of community and how to preserve the things that actually set us apart from other neighborhoods in West Hollywood and Los Angeles, and to really try to maintain the soul of our city, which I feel is kind of at risk of being lost. So, and I'm an architect, so.
Thank you. Craig, could you go next?
Sure. Unmuting here. Hi, my name is Craig Barbarian, Empire Property Group. We own, manage, develop, and we're also general contractors. And done a number of projects in West Hollywood. Currently have one in project in construction now in West Hollywood. And we've worked in other cities. We owned other buildings in other cities as landlords for apartments in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, and West Hollywood. And West Hollywood is its own world. It's its own creative city, and there's so many greatness that has been going on, and what we can continue doing in West Hollywood. And there's no better city than West Hollywood as far as what we could all do together, because it is a small community, and everybody really cares. So I'm here to contribute in any which possible way, from a developer's perspective, from a property manager's perspective, and as also a general contractor. Thanks.
Great. Chelsea.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Byers. I've worked with the United Ways Everyone in campaign for the past 3 years. And I'm really excited to be a part of this task force because I really care deeply about people and making sure that people's needs are met, and housing is ultimately for people. And I really think that this is an incredible opportunity to center land use as a really key social justice issue in our community. and deliver what people need to them. Really excited about that and great to meet you all.
Thank you. Mike?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Manville. I am a professor of urban planning at UCLA and a renter in West Hollywood. And housing's been a long time personal and professional interest of mine. I think for a lot of the reasons people on the call have already mentioned, it is so important to both people's well-being, community well-being, and so forth. So I'm excited to participate in this process.
Thank you. Marianne?
Hi, I'm Marianne Lowenthal with Combined Properties. I've been a real estate developer in LA for about 30 years, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles. We have a number of projects in West Hollywood, and I've been working in West Hollywood for about 15 years, trying to keep up with Craig the best I can. We love the city. I think, West Hollywood's just a super creative city, as Craig said. I want to piggyback on that. And I think that, if there's any community that can come up with some solutions for the affordable housing crisis, it's West Hollywood. So, I'm excited to be on this task force to hear different perspectives. And I obviously bring a developer's perspective. We love building and designing creative projects. And I think, West Hollywood they have a great opportunity to do some things a little out of the box that other communities might not be able to do. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Will?
Hey there, Will Korchek, Development Manager at AECOM Capital. And I've been working for the past couple of years on the design and construction team of the Penry West Hollywood here, where I am right now, with Marianne and Barry as well. I'm inspired to care so much about housing because I see how much West Hollywood cares about housing and their neighborhoods and the specific people in those neighborhoods on a very micro level. I think it's really special how the city invests in that way. And I think the housing element is a really cool document that's really simple. It's a set of goals and a set of policies that correspond to those goals and how ideally, they make those goals happen. I think it's cool to participate in helping the city perfect those policies to achieve their goals.
Great, thank you so much. And if we could just go to the next slide, Sarah. And the one after that, just to provide you one before, just the staff's names. So as I said, my name is Allison Bartle. I work in rent stabilization and housing. Rachel Diamond is going to be joining us shortly. We have a city council meeting tonight, and there's a couple items that have really stirred a lot of interest. And so she is putting out some fires on those, but she'll be jumping on to answer questions. She's with our long range planning division. And then Gurdeep, if you want to introduce yourself real quick, you can. Otherwise, I can give your intro. I'm not sure if I see your name, but I'm not sure if you're. Hi, Gurdeep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gurdeep Kaur. I'm an assistant planner with the Current and Historic Preservation and Planning Division, and also a former Bruin. So shout out to UCLA.
Thank you. And then we also have two consulting teams. And so our first consulting team is Rincon, and we're joined today by Sarah Howland and by Joe Power. We work with several people on their team. And then Veronica Tam and Associates helped us on our last 8-year cycle develop our housing element, and she is back with her team to also assist us. She really knows the ins and outs of how these housing elements get cooked and the state laws that go into them. And so she's been really vital in helping us on the back end understand how to be in compliance from a state housing perspective. So this is kind of the team that we've undertaken in the last year. We've been tracking the RENA, and then in the next year, we're part of the team that's going to be drafting and creating, with the help of the community and our task force, what the next housing element looks like. So if you could go to the next slide. Our objectives today. So first off, we wanted to introduce you. You guys we're so grateful to have this stellar task force. And so just going around, it was wonderful to hear all of your insights and all of your expertise. And that's really what we were trying to capture from this task force. So we're going to review the summary of what we've heard to date from the community. We're also going to discuss our housing element, previous housing element goals and policies, and much of your pre-work was to look at, what did we do in the last cycle and is that working? We also want to discuss our next goals and policies, and then we will review the next steps to making this task force effective. So next slide. Simple expectations. Again, you guys are experts in various ways in the community. So that's why we have you here and why we want your input. Rough expectations is just, there's only going to be 2 task force meetings, and it would be great if you could be able to attend both. The next one will likely be in May or June, and we'll be reviewing the draft housing element. So that's when we really are looking forward to digging in and seeing if we've captured what you think and what the community thinks for the next cycle. And then if we disagree, we're going to disagree respectively. We would like to, if you could activate your networks when you hear about this. We would love to hear from your communities that you are connected to. So also bringing them into the circle, as well as taking this information out of the circle. And then just being present. We've got about 90 minutes together. So if we could just do our best to avoid multitasking the best we can. I also understand it's the work day for some of you, so understood, but just trying to make the most of our time together. So thank you. Next slide. All right, so as I said in the email last week, the focus here isn't really to go into all the ins and outs of RHNA and to housing elements. What we want from you is kind of thinking through our policies and our goals and brainstorming your expertise, but just to get us all on the same page in terms of what has to go into a housing element. It's an analysis of the existing and projected housing needs. It's a review of the previous cycle, and then the constraints, opportunities, and resources. And then it's a policy statement. It's a statement of our goals, our qualified objectives, and the policies related to housing in the city of West Hollywood. Next slide. So we've had our community workshop, and we've also had public comment throughout the RHNA development process. And so this is kind of just an overview of what we've heard so far, very simplified, but it's a need to expand and preserve housing, a need for a variety of housing types to meet varying needs, a need for more housing. And we want to ensure that all people are housed and ensure that housing stability and reduced displacement, and a need for new housing ownership models, and then develop and preserve permanently affordable housing. That's kind of the, and then I see a lot of you are taking notes, and that's great. I will also make available these slides to the group after, but please take notes, and that's wonderful. Next slide. Okay, so as we've discussed, this RHNA number for our last cycle, the state told us that in an 8-year cycle, we needed to produce 77 units over that 8-year cycle. So we understand that also at the time that this RHNA was developed, we were just coming out of the housing crisis. And so these numbers are very low, and they reflect the methodology that was created at the time. Beverly Hills is notorious. Their RHNA allocation for the same time period was 3 units. So we know statewide that these allocations don't really align with the housing crisis that we've been experiencing in Southern California and Northern California for decades. And so if you look there in the middle column, this is what we've approved. So these are projects that happened over this 8-year life cycle. We had 2,259 units produced. It's actually a little bit higher because at the time that we made this chart, these numbers are probably 3 months old, so we might have a little bit more of an increase. And then what you see there is this overage, right? This overproduction that in this 8-year cycle, we produced almost 2,000 more units than we were required to by the state, which is a lot of units. So then if you go to the next item, or the next slide rather, the Southern California Association of Governments comes up with a methodology that it really takes a year to craft this methodology, and there's a lot of back and forth, and many cities have different desires. But at the end of the day, we are not going to receive credit for that overage. So our extra 2,000 units doesn't go into the next cycle, we don't get any credit for that overproduction. And so we lobbied pretty hard over the last year. Councilmember Meister is on one of the subcommittees, and she rallied really hard to say, you know, what are you doing for the cities that are good actors, that are meeting their RHNA and exceeding their RHNA? And then to not get credit for that is challenging, especially when you think that West Hollywood is only, you know, 1.9 square miles, the number of units that we're being asked to fit in our borders. That being said, we have been assigned our allocation for the next cycle, and the appeal period is just closing out. So this number could go up or down slightly. But roughly, you know, we've been told that we need to produce in the next cycle 3,924 units. We also know that 1,400 of those, almost half, need to be very low and low. And then 687 moderate, and above moderate can be, you know, 1,000 plus units. So, you know, this is kind of the reality that we're in as we're drafting our next housing element and thinking through the policies and goals that are going to allow us to, you know, plan for this big number.
Allison?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but real quick, I believe your numbers are actually reversed.
Oh, sorry.
From very low to more than moderate. So it's 1063 very low, 687 low, 681 moderate, and 1493 more than moderate.
Thank you, Adam. I will correct that before I send this around to the group. So I appreciate that.
No problem.
All right. So
there is, sorry, just real quick, there was a question in the chat.
Oh, yep.
Is more than moderate, does that just mean market rate?
Yes, market rate. And then I think, again, as Mike pointed out in the housing element, so we need to plan for, we need to zone for these units. It's not up to the city to be building these units. We just have to plan for them. So I think important highlight that Mike flagged here is we needed to plan for this. And so, but then I also wanted to, if you go back the slide, the actual numbers that these are units that were actually built. So these are really constructed units that people can move into. Next slide.
Allison, really one quick question on that, because, you know, one of the issues is trying not to, for me, is trying to make sure that all, you know, we have a diverse community and that all different demographics and different economic levels are all mixed into the community, so that we learn some level of compatibility and understand each other's issues. So when you say zoning, are we looking at just zoning low income in one part of the city and everybody that's in that demographic would live there?
No. These would be, you know, our inclusionary housing program, which has been around since cityhood, is understanding that we want a mix of incomes within buildings and within the city. So, you know, these low income and very low income and moderate units are often within the same building because of our inclusionary requirements. It's not in, you know, one specific area. And then in addition, with our 100% affordable projects, we're trying to spread those throughout the city. We're not trying to have all of our 100% affordable buildings on the east side of the city, or, you know, so it's very much about, and that's part of affirmatively furthering fair housing, is we need to be looking as a city, where is that taking place, and is it equitable? And are we making sure that we're putting low income housing in high opportunity areas as well, so that they have, you know, maximum opportunities to succeed? Next slide, Sarah. Okay, so a quick review. Let's jump to the next one of our of kind of what we're asked to do with it as a policy framework. So this is a very plenary document, the housing element, and so these are just, you know, kind of definitions of a goal, an objective, a policy, an implementation program, and a quantified objective. So as we go through the housing element, as you've seen when you reviewed our goals and policies, you know, these are specific requirements of the program, and what they have to have specific actions within them. So next slide. And in 2013 to 2021, we had 6 main goals within our housing element. The first one was to provide affordable rental housing. The second one was to maintain and enhance the quality of the housing stock in residential neighborhoods. The third was to encourage a diverse housing stock to address the needs of all socioeconomic segments of the community. The fourth was to provide for adequate opportunities for new construction of housing. The fifth was to provide for a government environment that facilitates housing development and preservation. And the last one was to promote equal access to housing for all. So looking at those, and we can flash back to them. I can ask our first discussion question. Let me just pull it up there so we can continue to look at the goals. So is a strong vision for housing preservation, production, and innovation reflected in these goals? And then what goals or objectives may need to be updated or added in order to meet these goals? So kind of looking through the pre-work that you did, a lot of you, I've already gone through some of them and just read through. As you look at these, you know, what's working and what's not, or what needs to be expanded. And so feel free, we can start throwing things in the chat. You can unmute yourself, but just take a minute and review these and what do you think's working and what's missing as you review these goals for our last housing element.
Maybe I can start.
Great, thank you.
This is Angie. I think sometimes it's really hard to connect goals to actual policy. And so I think reading these goals, they all sound really good. But I think when you get down to the nitty gritty, sometimes policy actually restricts us from being able to actually meet these goals. And so I have a lot of notes and I don't want to talk forever, but I just wanted to kind of bring up a few points that I've noticed about West Hollywood, which is different than Los Angeles, because we've worked both in West Hollywood and in Los Angeles. And then talk about perception, because I did just watch the PowerPoint presentation from January 19th. And someone from the community said that West Hollywood is the densest city, either in LA or in the country. I'm not quite sure. So there's a perception of density that I think isn't really correct. People sometimes think if we increase the density, then it's going to bring traffic, and that's not really the case. And within the city of West Hollywood, there are codes that exist that I believe restricts us from being able to increase the density, but not necessarily increase the volume of building in terms of height and scale. One of those is the allowable square footage per dwelling unit, which is double what Los Angeles is. Another one is this ordinance that doesn't allow housing over some of the commercial areas. And then another one is what I think is a golden opportunity for West Hollywood, which is the Santa Monica Boulevard spine, which in the 80s was zoned with an FAR of 3:1, because that was an allowable density that people thought would encourage a mixture of uses and be next to transit. It was cut in half in the late 80s so that our FAR along all of our commercial boulevards went to 1.5:1. And that was done with the leadership of Zev Yaroslavsky, because people were concerned about traffic. And we now know, after many years, that allowable density, there's a certain amount of density you need for walkable communities. So I would say that we should concentrate a lot of our thinking and allowable sort of density and mixture of uses along Santa Monica Boulevard, especially since we're talking about metro and transit and possibly the Purple Line coming through here. And then also kind of look at the R1 zones and maybe not be so restrictive as to only requiring single family there, but to allow up to 4 units, similar to what Sacramento did.
Hi, this is Adam. Sorry, Angie, were you finished?
Yeah, I could go on, but I will stop.
I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to make
That's
sure.
okay.
I just want to sort of branch off there a little bit and touch on what Angie said real quick. I think one thing that I think about that I'm not sure is totally reflected in the goals is the idea of sort of a more even impact across the city. I think it kind of leads into what Angie mentioned regarding R1 zoning, but it's this idea that if we have such uneven zoning across the city, like R1 through R5, et cetera, we end up with certain neighborhoods and areas that grow this concentration of bigger buildings, and then other areas that don't sort of share in that development. So I wonder if we could have a goal that reflects this idea of the city in a more well-distributed way, gradually growing, right? So that all of our neighborhoods do see some growth and gradual change, but that it's not necessarily more extreme in some places rather than others. Of course, accounting for the fact that in some places, like for example, along maybe some of the thoroughfares where we want to do the mixed use development, those areas might have particularly larger buildings as might be appropriate. Or as, I guess that's a subjective thing, as some might deem appropriate, right? This other idea I kind of want to mention is, and I think Angie, you touched on it a little bit perhaps, is this idea of what exists in the built environment around housing. I think that in West Hollywood, we're very fortunate to have access to a lot of high frequency bus lines. We're hopefully going to get the Crenshaw Northern Extension come through. But there's some other components. For example, when I think about supportive housing for seniors and those with disabilities, how are we thinking about, for example, perhaps the sidewalks and pedestrian access in the context of where those developments are going, right? How are we ensuring that the built environment is conducive to those with disabilities and seniors really everywhere in our city, of course. But I'm just curious if, like, I know that kind of goes maybe beyond the mandate of this task force and the housing element itself, but I think it's hard to extricate those things, right? If we want our city to be inclusive, not just of different socioeconomic levels, but also like folks with different levels of mobility and seniors, so that people can age in place. Yeah, how are we making sure that infrastructure accommodates for that, not just the housing we're building? So those are the couple of comments I wanted to.
And kind of, if I could just dovetail on what Adam and Angela said, when you look at those, I think those 5 or 6 or 8 housing goals that you had up there, Allison, kind of what Angela said, they're kind of, policy ideals, but they don't really speak to, what is the methodology to get you to that ideal. So it doesn't, and, maybe that's not the appropriate, maybe we're at that 30,000 foot level and we're, really shouldn't be digging into the details of how you accomplish that. But I think there was one H5 or H6, which was provide more space for more development and housing. Well, how do you go about that? Are you, do you propose to, if a building is vacant and the landlord isn't tearing down, that the city, takes over rights of that building? And so, I guess the thing is what is the proposal to get you from point A to point B? And then as an ancillary topic, and something that I'm very interested in is, I think there has to be a mind shift about density in our city. We're changing from a place where everyone thought they were going to own a home. And to be quite honest, I'm sorry to tell most people that's not going to happen anymore. And that we're going to have to be a city of density. We're going to have to start looking more like Chicago and New York City in order to accommodate. But I think there's some creative ideas, and maybe this isn't the platform for it, but if we allow a developer to have greater density, then maybe they can start to contribute to a neighborhood green space, a lot that's available that we turn into a green space, and that would really kind of get those neighborhood community members over that hurdle of higher density if they know they have a preserved, grandfathered in green park in their neighborhood that's always going to be there. So I would, one of my goals and things that I'm working on is kind of a tenant bill of rights, or a West Hollywood stakeholder bill of rights as it comes to housing, whether it be natural light, green space, or those kind of things. So, I would like to see that kind of start to dovetail. I know we're specifically talking about housing and meeting housing requirements, but it would be nice somehow to work into a qualitative element, maybe, into that discussion as well. And maybe it's not really part of this submission, but it's something that does tell as an amendment, how can we secure those things that are precious to the West Hollywood stakeholder, that we preserve that and we embellish that, So, but again, getting back to what Angela said, I'm kind of ambiguous a little bit about how you get from some of those high ideal policy statements, how you actually see those through, and how they kind of, what the mechanism is to get you there. So.
I'm ready, if nobody else is ready to jump in. I'd like to bring it back to the fundamentals. Angie brought up one thing that I think is important, and that is the spine of the city being Santa Monica Boulevard. But all of the ideas that everyone is talking about, those are the details. And what always happens is that the fundamentals rule us. And so we have got to get the fundamentals right before we can start to finesse things. So, I'm just looking at what we have accomplished in the last cycle and the enormous amount of housing that they're asking us to provide now, so that we can understand what we're dealing with. First of all, I think we already have the capacity, technically speaking, for our RENA numbers, looking at the maximum build out and everything that we've added during this last cycle. But looking at our RENA numbers realistically, there is no way that we can accomplish the low income and moderate income with the strategies that we have. Our last RENA cycle, or at least to date, we have managed in what we have built, 14% of that was low or moderate income to 86% market. That is how we achieved the number. Now, if we use that same ratio on the new numbers they're giving us, we would have to build 20,435 new units. That would be an 87% increase in our density. So obviously, the strategies that we're using, which is the backbone, is inclusionary housing, that's not going to work. Even at 20%, if it was all that 20% inclusionary, we'd still have to build over 14,000. That'd be an increase of 61% in density. So we need to think of new strategies for creating new housing. And along with that, we must protect our rent stabilized housing, because that is really, logically speaking, where the bulk of our affordable housing is. There's some low income in there. There's some moderate income in there, but 70% of our housing is this older housing, and most of that is rent stabilized. So we need to figure out new ways to create new housing while we are at the same time protecting rent stabilized buildings, because otherwise we're just not going to do it.
I think that was part of that discussion too. If a developers just came in over the next 8 years and did everything by right, would that even allow us to get close to our RENA goals?
No, that would be 20. That would be 20%. And if in order to produce that 20% in affordable housing, we'd have to build over 14,000 units.
Right.
That's a 61% increase in density. And how much of that is going to, we need to think outside the box here. Everybody talks about us being creative. We can be creative. I think someone else mentioned something along these lines. One thing that we can do, because we may be seeing some market shift from the lessons learned during COVID. One thing that we should think about is being prepared, exploring now the idea of converting office space to residential with more than 20% inclusionary. But that would take pressure off the residential rent stabilized buildings. So there's one idea. But our incentives should only be going to the things that are along the corridors, not additional bonuses in rent stabilized neighborhoods. We could let them build more units if they built smaller units, all small 1 bedrooms, 550 feet, 600 feet. So things like that, we've got to start thinking outside the box. I'd love to hear some ideas from some other people.
Yeah, this is Craig. Just regarding making some of the smaller units, obviously when you have a minimum unit size of 1,200, average unit size, and you're in these residential areas, FAR based, if you're in the corridors, absolutely, sure. But if you're in these other areas, you're not going to build 20 studios. It won't economically work. So I
Well,
think-
Craig, I'm trying to keep you out of the rent stabilized buildings. I'm trying to encourage you to go to the corridors.
Sure. Sure. I mean, that works as well. You know, that absolutely works. I think if you're in the, I mean, you're saying something about some of the conversion of offices. I think that idea, it sounds great, but having a construction background, we don't have that type of I mean, other than maybe on Beverly when they converted that building, the Townsend, sure, maybe, but there's not that many opportunities to convert from office to residential purely with our housing, with our stock. I don't think. In cities like New York, sure, you could do it, but I don't think that is something that. I mean, I'd love to hear from the group about that, of conversions of actual office buildings. Sometimes it's often just better, you know, you have to, you know, bring it to a higher and better use at that point. But I don't think the conversions are going to work.
Well, I think in the city of West Hollywood, you have to do a little bit of each, because there's.
You got to do a little bit of both. Yeah. You
try
to preserve roots.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you are right about new strategies, because the numbers don't work, you know, just the way you laid them out. And but I think it's both. I think the city has to be willing to be more dense, because you're going to have to do a little bit of everything. I mean, you might even have to take R1 neighborhoods and rezone some of those R1 neighborhoods, because if you
or in R2, you know, I mean, again, keeping to the heights, sure, but there's even the R2s. It's just that you're not even on a single lot. You can do 3 units. It doesn't.
Right, but if you could do more than that in certain areas where it made
sure.
Planning wise or architecturally, I think that would be good. And I think the city has to think about. I mean, all of this comes down to economics, right? And how do you finance affordable housing that doesn't, you know, make economic sense for anybody to build it? Now, I don't know if there are ways that, you know, with the city's balance sheet from a finance perspective, there are things and strategies that can be done to, you know, for the city or a nonprofit to be building, to be able to build, you know, at cheaper rates and so forth. But there's no way to do this without being more dense. And this, I think the city has to make a decision. Is affordable housing in the next 8 or 10 years more important than some other things that have been really important to the city? Because the city takes way too long to come to a conclusion about a project, and in allowing it to be built or not built to get to the numbers that you need to get to. And you know, there's always neighborhood considerations, and that's always taken precedent over needing to build more housing. And so I think the city council and the community has to have a fundamental shift in their thinking too, or it's never going to get done, to build the more affordable piece. Because I think what you said is right. I mean, the city has built whatever it was, 2,300 residences or new units. Now they've got to build 3,900. How is that ever going to happen? That's going to be a lot of brain damage for Allison and all of the people working at the city, because it's like pulling teeth, right, in West Hollywood, unless there's a fundamental shift in what people are trying to do.
There's a big physical question to that. Sorry, Sheila.
Go ahead, please.
There's a big physical spatial question to that, and there isn't a goal that speaks to space or the, you know, quality of the environment, except for the one about maintaining the quality of the housing stock. So maybe there's another goal that ties more specifically to the zoning code.
That's right.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I just wanted to surface one other piece that I've noticed from my point of view around affordable housing and some of the limitations. We know funding is typically a big reason why we can't build the amount of affordable housing, our housing that we want. But I also see trade-offs that, like, parking is tethered to the need for affordable housing. And I just think immediately about the economic trade-off where we're promoting more parking spaces when we really are wanting more affordable housing units. and wondering if policies like reducing or eliminating parking minimums is a good way to go to focus on our housing goals.
The city has a
The
lot
use
of that.
of transit, yeah.
Yeah,
City
the
has quite a bit of that
Yeah.
already.
The only way we were able to put eight affordable housing units in our Kings Road project was we weren't required to have parking for those residences on Santa Monica Boulevard in Kings. If we
Even
were to
since then,
have
it's not
parking,
that anymore.
we would not have been able to build 8 residences.
So in Los Angeles,
Affordable.
the TOC ordinance has really been successful, and that is around transit nodes, you can build 100% affordable housing with no parking. I've worked with several nonprofit developers, and I'm sure every single one of them would develop a project in West Hollywood if it was simple or easy. I think if we're going to have to build a lot of units, I think we need to make it also easier for nonprofit developers to come in and build 100% affordable housing. I think we actually need everything. We need the private developers to build inclusionary. We need the affordable housing developers to build their projects. And they always want to build on commercial boulevards because that's where all the amenities are. That's where the transit is. And if you're building permanent supportive housing for people, they want to be near these things. They want to be able to walk down the sidewalk to the library or what have you. So if rather than a discretionary review, we allowed nonprofit developers and maybe private developers who are doing the 20%, if they follow design guidelines, then they have a ministerial review and not a discretionary review or something. That would be an incentive for them to kind of come in and do their projects. But, you know, I've done a lot and they aren't that big, 35 units. I'm doing one now in Venice, which is just 2 lots tied together. And the units are 325 square feet each. So they're relatively small, but they'll have kitchens. This isn't shared housing. I'd like to talk a little bit about shared housing as well, but this is a very dense project that doesn't look that dense because the units are smaller. So I think we need to incentivize developers to be able to build these smaller units. And it's for TAY, so it's for transitional aged youth who really want a roof over their heads and they want to step up, and they can, it's a very livable space. We've done some units at 245 square feet each, and those don't have kitchen ranges. They have Murphy beds and a microwave and a little kitchenette, and then there are common kitchens where people cook their food. You can build up to 264 dwelling units per acre at that scale. In a building that is only 4 stories and it looks pretty typical, there are ways to actually get density in buildings that don't look that large by actually just targeting unit sizes.
So one of my questions on this too is we're talking about how to accomplish this goal that's kind of been handed down, and I know the city made a decision not to go back and kind of contest that that number that's been handed down from RENA. But what if the market, if the need is just not there, or you know, are we taking into account that we're going through a pandemic and the market is shifting right now? And you know, what if the city? I mean, the city over the last 10 years, I think, has grown by approximately 1,500 people. What if there's just not the demand for this amount of units? I mean, is the market for this any consideration? I'm just curious, Allison.
So, well, maybe I can, because this is a point I brought up at the beginning, and I want to revisit it because we clarified it and then lapsed back into talking about it in a way that actually doesn't reflect what RENA is. We're under no obligation to produce housing, right? We're under an obligation to zone for it, and that is a difference I think that's important with respect to what we're doing here, right? Obviously, the state can't expect us to physically make housing appear as a city government. And I think the number, RENA is sort of, the RENA number sort of looks like what UCLA does when it wants a freshman class, right? There's an anticipated take rate. And so it's like, we want 5,000 students, we let 11,000 in because some are going to go elsewhere. And the zoning number with RENA is similar to that, right? You zone for a certain number of units on the understanding that the market may not be there, that some of these sites aren't going to be developed for idiosyncratic reasons.
Right.
With SB 35 in place, there are now more than in the last cycle. We're on the hook a little bit more to actually produce something, right? Because we could lose some discretion if we don't produce enough of the affordable units. But I mean, I really think we should keep in mind, like, our goal here is not to actually physically produce buildings, right? That's not what RENA asks us to do. It asks us to zone and then
kind of create the opportunities, right?
And that's totally within the city's power, right? Mm-hmm. So why should that be so difficult? If affordable housing is the most important, or housing's so important, why should it be so difficult for the city to zone for those many units.
And I agree. And if I may, I just one more thing, just agreeing with a lot of the things other people have said about the parking requirements. You know, in addition to, I think that really making a lot of land a lot more feasible for development. If you reduce or remove those, it also goes back to the question that I believe Adam raised earlier about creating an environment that's like hospitable to a lot of different people. You know, one of the things that really makes a street pretty inhospitable is an abundance of parking. If you are a pedestrian or someone using a mobility device, you know, because you do have to worry about, you know, when every building has one or two big curb cuts with a driveway, it diminishes the pedestrian experience a lot. And I think if you do want to start to move toward a denser urban environment, one of the mistakes that a lot of places make is they do the density without changing the car orientation. And that does become quite dysfunctional when you try to create sort of street vitality, because it isn't that much fun to walk down a sidewalk and worry that someone's going to run you over.
Hi, this is Adam again. Real quick, Sheila, I wanted to touch on something you said that I think is so important, and other folks have mentioned as well, which is preserving the city's existing rent stabilized housing stock. I think that's so important. And I think that what we're talking about is like one of the ways we do that, right? Which is bringing up the zoning of some areas of the city so that there's other places where folks can develop. There's other places where we can put more housing so that we take some of the pressure off of potentially redeveloping sites that have existing rent stabilized units, right? So that I totally support continuing to create more deed restricted affordable housing. I also think it's really important to protect the existing rent stabilized housing. And if we look at the zoning map of West Hollywood, there's actually a really big percentage of the city that currently is restricted to only single unit housing, right? So we're really underutilizing a huge portion of the city. And then if we add in the R2, which we could also potentially bring up, right, to bring in more housing. And I know in a lot of those R2 areas, there are only single family homes there where there could be more, right? I think that's really important. And then to touch on, Barry, something you said in terms of, do we actually have that need? Is the need actually still there? I think we definitely have to think of ourselves as part of a larger region, a larger like commuting region, right? And when we think of things that way, we know, A, we want to continue to produce more housing so the region as a whole can benefit and grow in the right way. But then thinking about our own community, one thing I think about is the city of West Hollywood actually has a relatively high ratio of jobs to housing. To me, what that means is like, oh, cool. That means potentially if we take the opportunity to bring more housing here, continue to do so, we actually potentially reduce traffic, right? Because instead of so many people commuting into our city, maybe we have more people walking and biking to work and taking some car traffic off the road, make it more pedestrian friendly, that kind of thing. Any of us that live on Fountain know that it's like a simple street that's turned into a freeway, which is super dangerous. And I think there was one more thing I wanted to mention, I can't remember, but I think it sounds like there's some amount of consensus in the group, correct me if I'm wrong, that like we definitely want to continue to produce more affordable units, protect rent stabilized units. And it feels like there's somewhat of a consensus that to do so, we need to look at both developing in these commercial corridors with some more mixed use buildings. Angie, as you were talking about, there's a lot of reasons why developers want to do that. In addition to taking the opportunity to, as I mentioned in the beginning, allow more of this gradual development up everywhere where we're maybe taking R1 to R2, we're taking R2 to R3, that kind of thing.
Allison,
may I jump in just very quickly? I just want to point out, and this is thank you, Adam, for bringing some of this stuff up. What I want to make a point of is lessons learned from watching this last cycle. I just want to make a point that with our last general plan, the community was assured that all the mixed use everything going to the boulevards was going to relieve the pressure on rent stabilized neighborhoods. But the bottom line is that housing goes where it goes. So if you zone for it, it's going to go where it's the most profitable. And I think that something that we've learned is that one of the profitable place that was cheaper to buy land was in the residential neighborhoods than on the main boulevard. So no, it's not all going to get built, but whatever we zone for, that may be where the development ends up going. So we just have to be cognizant of that. So in other words, like going with what you're saying, Adam, if we upzoned some areas, and SB 330 lets us do this. If we upzone at all, we can also downzone to the equivalent to, again, protect rent stabilized housing. But please, just everybody keep in mind that if we zone for it, the developers will decide where to go. And I'm hoping that they go to the boulevards. And I think that there are more things we can do with some of the other parcels on the boulevards, maybe not as big, maybe not to build as big as some of the projects we've been getting on the boulevards, but certainly we can build more housing there.
I'm curious about this sentiment, because I do think within the group, and I think within West Hollywood, there's two sentiments, right? There's this idea that West Hollywood is a small town, and it's going to be a small town, and we can put all the density on the corridors, and we can leave everything else the same. And then there's a different push of livable, walkable communities where density is evenly spread throughout the city, maybe more along corridors. But there's definitely a tension between what Adam is saying and what Sheila is saying, right? There's two kind of different viewpoints that are at play. When you look at the makeup of our city council and the members on it, there's very clear, there's one kind of mind thought, and then there's another mind thought that is at tension and that is very real as we think about our plan for the next housing element. And I think specifically speaking to how folks, what was highlighted, what I think is very interesting is how we frame density, because, as Angie said, in listening to the community, to any community conversation, density for a lot of people is bad. Density is bad for many, many folks in West Hollywood, and there's a huge fear of density and development. And so managing that with also understanding that we have a couple market rate developers on the call, and we have a pro-development approach in West Hollywood, that people want to see things built. And how do you think that these two tensions can be kind of aligned in this next housing element as we kind of engage with the community?
And this is Angie. Not all developers are big corporations either. We have to remember. So I live in Venice, and it's zoned R2. So that means I can actually put 4 units on my property, but they would never fit because I have to park it all. But I could put an extra one. So my neighbor is actually doing that because she's thinking about when she's going to retire and she's going to want to rent a unit to someone else. So I think we need to keep in mind that developers are not all bad. You know what I mean? And that a lot of the areas of West Hollywood, I think, are going to be smaller landowners or smaller homeowners who are going to be adding that 1 unit or that 2 unit. And a couple of interesting facts that I think I just wanted to mention is that the population of West Hollywood is 36,450 people, and there's a total of 26,308 units, dwelling units. So that means on average, there's not even 2 people per unit throughout the entire city if you were just blanket the city, okay? Then we have these areas of very low kind of suburban density where we are restricting it to 1 dwelling unit per parcel. I don't think that this idea of maintaining affordable rents is not different. It is not opposite of, it's not the same as downzoning, what I'm trying to say. So you can remove a restrictive zoning requirement, which says you can only put a single family house on this lot, you could then say the maximum volume of this building is going to be X. Like just take that same house that you're looking at and say it's the same thing, but you can put 2 units in here instead of 1, right? So that 2 households could actually rent that 1 house, or it could be 2 homes could actually build houses there. It could be a fee simple small lot subdivision ordinance that we do. So it could be 2 homeowners who just own smaller houses. That would then help you meet your RENA numbers, because then it's a single family area, but you have 2 units there. So I'm trying to kind of, and it would be interesting to find out if in these R1 and R2 zones, do we have like 3 unrelated people living together in a house? Because if you were to simply say you can allow 3 households, meaning 3 single individual households live together, that would meet your RENA numbers without actually doing anything other than changing the zoning.
Well, if you think about it, right, the mansionization of all these areas, right? You've got, I don't know in West Hollywood on single family lots, how big they're building some of these homes. I know in my neighborhood, I live in Cheviot Hills, and they're building 5,000 square foot houses. Well, do you know how many people? It's the same space, right? I mean, I don't like the homes, but
I could put 20.
people,
I could put 20 units in that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, in West Hollywood, I don't know some of those, all the cookie cutter big homes that are, I don't know what size they are, 3,000 square feet or something. That's, 10 people could live in that place, and it's the same space. From a just a physical perspective, as long as it's nice looking, right? That's what I think West Hollywood does really well. They require nice buildings.
Yeah. It's a little bit ironic. I was interviewed by the Beverly Press to be on this committee, and they asked me for some images. So I sent them an image. So the cover image of the article is a project we did called Orange Grove, which is in West Hollywood, but it's 5 units on a lot that was a typical suburban lot. It had a little house on it. It was one small developer who wanted to convert it. And so it's 5 condominiums, and they just sit one behind the other. But when you look at it from the street, it looks like one nice house. And then there's just kind of, the parking code was, to me, pretty over the top at the time. So we did a kind of semi-subterranean parking garage under it. But if the parking regulations are relaxed a little bit, it's something that can easily be done, and it sits between 2 apartment buildings.
Can I jump in and just point out that one of the biases tied to the idea of density is racial? A lot of the arguments that you hear in neighborhood councils are about the degradation of the community if you bring in density. So that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're advancing these arguments of why density is good. There's an underlying racial bias of this renter, this low income renter that I don't want in my neighborhood. It's an unspoken thing, but it's pretty prevalent once you start pressing the public about why they're against certain things. So I think a part of the strategy definitely needs to address these underlying causes of why it's, you're going, well, we need this and it's there. Why isn't the community rallying? Because we're not speaking these things that need to be said out loud. And so that's just going to be a hard fought push. It's not going to be easy, but it's got to be introduced to the public so that they can become aware of why they're biased about this, so that the city can move forward.
And start having that conversation. Right?
Yeah, and I think some of those things are actually I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I think some of those things are actually embedded in the code as it exists now, because the R4 zone, for instance, requires 872 square feet per dwelling for each dwelling unit. And if you go to the city of LA, it's 400 square feet. So the city of West Hollywood, if you think about it, requires double the land area for the same amount of dwelling units that the city of Los Angeles does. That's just in the books right now.
So is it possible
No, go ahead.
as people are kind of spitballing on these ideas, one of the things, because I think that the requirements lean to the higher end or market rate units, and then they lead to the lower income or low income units. And, that said, talking about densification along Santa Monica Boulevard, when I think about all of the services I go use on Santa Monica Boulevard, all the people that work in there are driving in from Whittier or Orange County or whatever to work at the Sprouts grocery store, to work at Starbucks and stuff. So could there not be some idea where we could, in an ideal world, actually try to kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone with this exercise and looking at how do we start to provide out of the box units, micro units, some of these units, Angela, that you've spoken about, where we could start to provide for some of our service providers in the city who all have to drive in 40, 50 miles, contributing greenhouse gas emissions to, you know, some of the items that we're trying to be more creative and solve. I'm just, could we kind of be brave maybe and go out on a limb and maybe all the policy issues aren't resolved yet, but it's a solution to the problem. And as the creative city, we need to kind of be a little bit on the more idealistic side and propose, because I would really love to see some of the people that really can't afford to live in our city, but they provide our services every day, to actually be able to be residents of West Hollywood. It would be very nice, you know?
I wanted to jump into Allison's earlier point or question about the tension that exists between the two ideas around increased zone capacity. And I just pulled up a map, and maybe it's because I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and spent my childhood walking miles and miles just to find some sort of convenience store, like literal miles in 120-degree weather. But it just doesn't seem like we have a city center. We have a really amazingly walkable community from any neighborhood you end up living in to that central hub of the community that is Santa Monica. But I really, you know, I push back against this idea that we would build a spine that would sort of be reminiscent of like a Wilshire Boulevard and then just sort of taper off around it when we're just going to be butting into somebody else's big spines. I really appreciate this sort of more equitable way of thinking about distributing future housing construction, knowing that we're not placing or plotting the lots, but just by sort of opening things up to the entirety of this funny shaped L that we have as a city, and seeing where the housing gets built from that point of view, knowing that everyone has pretty incredible access to resources, that it promotes an actual more distributed, walkable city, and it doesn't actually center on anything except for the entirety of our community. I just want to sort of think about more of that tension that exists there and maybe some ways that we can be pushing back on it.
At the same time, thinking about
Chelsea,
Hollywood.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say.
Okay, I just wanted to address that one thing as far as the spine is concerned. First of all, the reason I keep referring to Santa Monica is because one thing that we always have to keep in mind in West Hollywood is the elevation. So when you are talking about people readily using transportation and the best places for for housing with less or no parking, Santa Monica is one of the level streets within the city. When you build it outside or on the hills, it's not so easy to walk to the bus stops. And the other thing is just, again, protecting rent stabilized housing. That's the only difference to me between whether it's on Santa Monica, which is a commercial boulevard, or whether it's in the residential neighborhoods. The only thing in my mind is protecting the bulk of our truly affordable housing, which is rent stabilized buildings. That's the only thing that's entering my mind.
I was going to say too that there's benefit in the diversity of the neighborhoods in West Hollywood, the diversity of the built environment. And I think the city has tried to cultivate that in defining certain regions. I think that's okay too. I don't think you need to, blanket change zoning.
Hi, this is Adam. Just real quick, Sheila, I totally agree with you about the rent stabilized units. I think that's why in my point earlier I made about gradually bringing up zoning everywhere is because those R1 neighborhoods, we know none of it is rent stabilized, right? We know that rent stabilization cannot apply to single family homes. So that is our trove of parcels where we know if we redevelop, we're not getting rid of rent stabilized. So I just wanted to call that. Oh, and then real quick to Chelsea's point, I think the other thing we have to look at is that we're in the middle of this big urban area. So Santa Monica is a spine, but then there's also Melrose and Beverly, even though that's right, most of them are not within the city of West Hollywood.
Right.
Those are all, so we're surrounded by commercial areas. Like most of us are within 1 block of a commercial strip. And so it's another reason why we might want this sort of like, you know, gradual increase everywhere, even if, you know, Will, to your point, like it doesn't mean we have to take R1 up to R5 or something, or R4 rather. But like, you know, we do like kind of bring it all up. So.
Yeah. Well, to Angela's point as well, Angela, I think what you gave, there were 26,000 current residential units, correct, in West Hollywood, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at a 3,600 whatever increase, that's over a 10% increase in the total amount of units. That's a huge endeavor. That's kind of a, you know, once in 100 years kind of change to the city, you know, layout or the city plan. And so I think this has to be kind of a brave proposal in a sense. There has to be a certain level of creativity, maybe something that is not so, like a better word, pedestrian or mundane. It's got to have a, you know, it's got to be a little bit of a big solution. And I do think, and I'm just going to put it in practicality because Allison, I don't know what the whole approval is for this. You know, finally, I'm assuming that it has to go to some community hearings and there is some community involvement in the adoption of what's proposed. But the one thing about actually allocating this to a spine is if you want to get the entire city of West Hollywood into a NIMBY mood, I would say good luck with getting anything approved. So if you kind of start to isolate this through specific areas as opposed to blanking the entire city, you have a much larger chance of getting something approved as opposed to just being in a never-ending NIMBY cycle. So
let's see, I have a couple of things. This is Angie. Going back to the zoning map of West Hollywood and this sort of spine, I read the Metro brochure and kind of future transit, what's going to happen in the future. And if you look at where all the stops are, there are literally some stops where it's adjacent to commercial where housing is not allowed to be built. And I'm not sure why that is, but it just seems kind of silly to me. You know, I think we have to start to overlay transit. And, you know, we're talking about like 20 years in the future, right? So if this is the next cycle, the stuff that's going to be in the pipeline and developed is going to last for 60 years. So we have to look 60 years into the future. So looking 60 years into the future, I guarantee you we're going to have some transit going through Santa Monica Boulevard, and we're going to want to have people living near transit stops. And so I think if we look at that, and there are other commercial areas where housing is allowed, but the FAR is only 2.0, which means if you fill out the site, you can only build a 2-story building. It really needs to be more than that. And I think if we were to say, if you're a developer of 100% affordable housing, you know, please come to our neighborhood. We want you to develop here. If you develop along this commercial boulevard, which is frankly probably where everybody wants to develop, and it's 50 units or less, you can develop that by right. Period. You know, maybe there are some design guidelines that they have to follow, but no discretionary approvals, no public hearings, limit the parking, obviously, because you're near transit, maybe follow the TOC guidelines. There is AB 1763 that actually exists right now, which is a bill that says you can increase the density by 80%, the underlying density, and you can increase the height by 30 feet and the stories by 3 if you build 100% affordable housing. So we're using that on a project right now in Santa Monica, but that means a developer, a nonprofit developer can come in and just take your base zoning and increase the density by 80%. I'm not sure why nonprofit developers aren't flocking to West Hollywood to build projects, but there's got to be a reason. And I know that there would be a lot of development if it was easier.
Angela, I know the reason. And the reason is because land use is very passive from the city's perspective. The reason that some of these ideas that are great that aren't being taken off, I think, is because the city is not initiating them. I think it's time to go from passive, here's what we have, to let's get RFPs in. You know, we've zoned out. I'd love to see a map, and not just a map of the zoning, but of that green space so you can get in that environmental justice. I drive past Gelson's, Pavilions, to Ralph's to go to Smart and Final. That's where I shop in my community. And I'm okay with that. I love that. I feel like I should be living on the other end, closer to town, but that's So I think that also goes to that idea of inclusion, where you can look at all of these different things and say, okay, it's not just mixed income, but it's which grocery stores are people going to? You'll never catch me at Equinox. I love it, but I will go to a Gold's Gym or something, cheaper down the street. And so I want to see RFPs from the city. I want the city to say, this is all the available land we have, all of it, and it's all owned by us. And if you want to build this or this or this, we have created this planner who's going to sit in and process all of it. We're going to walk it through for you and help you get it done. So I think let's be less passive. Let's create those maps. Let's see where those environmental green spaces are, that empty land, that dilapidated house where we should be going to the homeowner, going, give us this, and just be proactive instead of going, hey, does anybody want to take advantage of any of these bills or state law? That's not working.
It seems to me too that the city is sitting on quite a few parcels that can be developed. And I don't know, Allison, if you guys are working on plans for getting those out.
Yes, we are. So in summary, Don, Will, feedback noted, we hear you. I think generally in our, in the city internally, it's always a bit of an arm wrestling match between different departments about who's going to get which land. And I think with the shifting environment of state bills and housing legislation in the last 3 years, for example, we just hired a new person about a year ago, and his whole job is to get more land for the city, so we own more sites, and then to RFP and RFQ the sites, and it's kind of a central housing person to just do this. And before it was, whomever was thinking that if it was going to be green space, then this department would take the lead on it. If it was going to be housing, then I would get in, I would get to take the lead. But it oftentimes was kind of at this constant, infighting, and it's really an interdepartmental goal, right? We want a mixed use development that's going to be heavily residential, but it's also going to have commercial components, maybe a parking component, green space. And so within the city, it was difficult to kind of wrangle those different mindsets. And Dawn, I completely agree with you that, unlike HCID or the county or Metro, when they just say, hey, we've got all this land, here's the RFP for it, go after it. And it's a really clear pathway that what you're going to get, and what the agreements are going to look like, and the timeline and the process. So very much hear you, and it's very helpful to hear. Also, your feedbacks helps us all in the housing department have more power to say, this is what people want, this is what people are noticing. It's not just the 5 people that come to the city council meeting and talk about NIMBY, because that's a big part of it. The city council, when you go to these meetings, a lot of what you're saying and a lot of the conversation we're having doesn't take place at the council. So that's another issue, just about how the policy direction of the city. But it's often, this voice is not usually the loudest voice in the room, if that makes sense.
But it's great because what you're naming are organizational issues, right? You just go from CIA, haphazard FBI, response to Department of Homeland Security. So you're doing what's necessary to fix. And all I'm hearing is they have different stakeholders. But if you have the audience for the messaging that you need, then yes, you'll definitely, get that good feedback. So that's wonderful.
Yep. Well, great. So we are. I don't want
to. Allison, may I'd just like to bring up one other thing that because I'd really like to have some feedback on this, and this is not about development, but it is about something that's smaller, but it is about combining the idea of creating new affordable units along with the idea of protecting rent stabilized buildings. Because we haven't done a really great job as far as helping them with rehab and stuff like that. So, just for something small, the city could allocate some funds, a small amount of funds, simply to allow a senior or a disabled person to switch apartments from upstairs to downstairs. so that they can continue living there. We've talked about this for a long time and we just haven't pulled it through. But a bigger idea, I noticed in your slides, you said that right now, 75% of the projects under review are paying in lieu fees. And the affordable housing trust funds being used for building brand new affordable units is expensive. It's really expensive. I would like to see us explore the idea of putting up a certain amount of rehab funds. I mean, you guys would have to do a lot of work on this, but put up a certain amount of rehab funds to make them available to building owners in exchange for dedicating one of their apartments affordable. That would create new housing. It would generate some rehab funds for people to help keep their buildings revitalized. So I just want to put that out there.
Great. Just a quick summary. A lot of you, I think almost everyone has given me their pre-work, but specifically in those top 3 questions, it's been helpful to read. As we've been discussing, I've been taking notes and this is being recorded, but a lot of you have really great ideas about specific policies, or you maybe don't know the specific policy, but you can point to, TOC guidelines or another city. It's very helpful for us as we're reviewing to just get access to all your network and all your thinking, because I think we are all chasing the same goals. We just are coming at it from different perspectives. So, please in the next month, as you're thinking about this, send those our way. Please send them to me and I can disseminate them to the group. I'll be the gatekeeper. But that's, really helpful, especially because we're just limited in the time we have to develop this policy guide. And you guys are also, I've been taking frantic notes and I think it's been, a really successful conversation. I think we could talk for hours about this. So as we're going through, please send them my way. I'm happy to continue collecting that as things come up. And again, thank you for completing your pre-work. Sarah, if you could jump back to our PowerPoint, I was just going to go through a couple final items to keep us on track to end on time. So the schedule coming up, we are right now we've done our initial engagement and we are now jumping into our technical background report. So we are doing our sites analysis of the city using GIS to understand our capacity analysis. So that's going to be ongoing sort of for the next month. And then as we understand the capacity and we're collecting all this policy information and feedback from the community in March and April, we're going to be drafting the next housing element. And then we hope by May-ish to have the next draft of the housing element. And then that's when we would like to reconvene with you guys to look into the specifics of what we miss. And that's probably going to be some sort of Google document or some sort of shared document where, depending how much you want to be involved and how much you want to dig in, you can. If you don't and you want it to be more of a high level engagement, we also will welcome that feedback. So that'll kind of be like choose your own adventure, and then we can reconvene as a group to discuss. And we're also at the same time undergoing our environmental review. So Rincon, who is on our development team, they are experts at environmental review, and they'll be kicking off that process in tandem. We are doing a full-blown EIR. So, and then there's various other throughout the process engagement as we come back together with Planning Commission and with City Council. The goal being that we have a completed housing element by October, is it the 4th or the 15th? It's early October of 2021. And so that's kind of the outline, but just the essentials for you guys is I'll be reaching out again in May, likely, to get on your calendars and to make sure we have enough time to find a date. I know doodles are always difficult, especially with all of you and your other engagements, but hopefully we can find a good date in June. And then if you go to the next slide, everything we're doing related to the housing element is based off of our website. So it's got access to our previous engagement with the community, our RENA, our APRs, and we also launched our survey. So if you go to that, the survey we're going to have up probably for the next month or so. Please, activate your friends and have them take that housing survey for us so we can get some feedback from the community. And then lastly, just thank you. As I said, we appreciate your time and we appreciate your passion and your deep knowledge that you bring to this discussion. And please continue to ping me and reach out. We're happy to continue the conversation and to activate all of your knowledge. So with that, if there's not any other, I can open it if there's any final comments to the group. Otherwise, we can wrap up.
Just one quick question, Allison. So if there's things that we have other thoughts about or interested or something we read that we think might be applicable or kind of, it's okay to forward that to you?
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
And then if it's something that you have a question about, either myself or someone in planning, if it's more of a planning question, we'll get back to you.
Okay. I just wanted to say this was great. Thank you so much. And one quick note, I just heard this. The entire city of West Hollywood is a transit quality neighborhood. So if you live anywhere in West Hollywood, you're near transit, which is just amazing. You don't have to really fight against this fact that you have to get in a car and go somewhere, So I think we have that going for us.
Yeah, I think it's everything, but we just did the math for an item coming up, but I think it's everything except for like 100 parcels are within the 15-minute headways of two intersections. So it's really amazing.
Which is really great. Yeah. So I have a vision of just looking at the whole city and kind of overlaying, the bike map, the transit map, the parks and just everything. And it just could be just this amazing place.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again and have a great rest of your day, everyone. And tune into the city council meeting tonight if you want to hear more about West Hollywood happenings.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.